Welcome to Conversations with the Chronicle. My name's Eric Crump. I'm with the Homewood Flossmoor Chronicle. Today is Wednesday, December 10th, 2025, and our guest is Representative Will Davis, who represents the 30th District, which includes Homewood and Flossmoor. Today we want to talk to him about some important legislation that was passed in October and about updates on the South Suburban Airport project and education funding. The veto session had one big bill that has a direct effect on the Homewood Flossmoor area, which is the transit bill. This summer, the transit officials in the state were talking about a fiscal cliff. They were talking about going over the cliff, which made us a little nervous. It involved some service cuts potentially, fare increases, a lot of bad stuff. But in the veto session, you passed a transit bill, and we were wondering if you could kind of walk us through what that bill is going to accomplish and how you got from the cliff to funding the transit system.
I don't want to understate how important transit is to our communities. City of Chicago has a very evolved transit system, but it's a little bit more challenging in collar counties and suburban communities. And also, let's not forget downstate travel, transit as well. In my opinion, and I was the only South Suburban member who the speaker appointed to the mass transit working group, as we called it. So from my perspective, I think the challenge with transit really centered around revenue. Now, interwoven in there was governance. The RTA board needed some reform, and I would probably argue that all of the three transit agencies needed some real reform as well. But I think it really boiled down to money. So when we heard the conversation about what I'm going to call the supposed fiscal cliff, not that money isn't important, but it's interesting because I want to say the methodical way we went about it, but somewhere in the midst of that, all of a sudden RTA found an additional $200 million, which means that I think it was CTA in particular only needed $70-some million to operate, where at one point we were talking about over $300 million. So our approach, I think, was the appropriate one. We took a very methodical approach in the House. The Senate went about it a little differently. They used their transit or transportation committee, which means they had both Democrats and Republicans as part of the conversation. We had a mass transit working group, but we did have a Republican, and that was Brad Stevens, who also is the mayor of Rosemont, as a part of our working group in the House. But money was really the focal point. Where are we going to come up with the revenue to sustain transit off into the future? And then also, how do we deal with governance issues? So as you probably know, that your viewers may not know, is that we eliminated what we call the RTA board. We call it now the Northeast Illinois Transit Authority, or NETA board for short. And we're asking those that make appointments to make new appointments to the board, put some fresh blood on there, put some new ideas, new people on there, not just the same old people who, because they're retired and supposedly doing nothing, they just put them on these boards. Many of them are just there in name only. They don't really do any real work. So what we wanted to make sure is that we put a board in place and then also encourage the transit agencies to do better at who their board selections are as well. So, but I think the crux of the problem was just revenue. And it was a matter of how do we come up with the right revenue to put on the table that not only sustains the agencies, but also gives the agencies what they need in order to evolve. Because what we heard in our conversations, particularly the further out from Chicago and in the far out collar counties, while PACE is there in particular, it's still not servicing what folks would like it to serve. And what we have learned, particularly going through pandemic and other things over the last few years, is that particularly transit, that's something that just truly has to be there, not just for regular riders like you and I, but also the paratransit aspect of it. You know, folks who need that additional help or need wheelchair lift style vehicles to get around. We knew that that was important and knew it had to be stood up. Paratransit falls to PACE, and so we wanted to make sure that PACE had what it needs to make sure that paratransit was done as well. Now, one thing that I've kind of floated out there, and maybe I'll follow up on, is like we have RTA, well not RTA, but in terms of the service agencies, PACE, Metra. Metra needed some help too in terms of what they're trying to do in terms of extending some of their lines. and then CTA, I wonder if paratransit should be its own service board. You know, maybe that's something we really need to consider in standing it up on its own by itself, so that it can solely focus on paratransit and not have to necessarily balance with PACE, within PACE, how it makes decisions about its regular transit and its paratransit. And then also coordination amongst the agencies was important as well. We need to see more of that coordination, working together. Cook County did some interesting things over the last couple of years, particularly with some of the COVID money that was available, where they created reduced fare ride opportunities, using the Metro app and the Venture app, if you will. There was a conversation about Metro having what we call rapid transit service, where they would run more trains in a frequency, just like CTA runs trains. Well, we know that all those trains are coming from basically outskirts of Chicago into Chicago primarily, but particularly in the electric line, which is out here that runs through my district, could it be an opportunity for folks like me who just want to go to Hyde Park, into the city, where there is a stop, but if I got to wait an hour to catch that train, but if it ran more frequently, suburban folks enjoy going into the city, so there was an opportunity there. So there was a lot to it, a lot to unpack, but, we feel where we landed is a good spot, but it opens the door and creates the opportunity for us to continue to monitor, continue to watch, and to make changes as necessary as time goes on.
Some of the money you came up with was reallocation, wasn't it? And some new money, is that correct? What are the new sources of funding?
Well, you could call it new, but there's a sales tax that goes into transit that collar counties in particular contribute to. So we raised it slightly.
Okay.
So we could consider that new money, but it's coming from the traditional source.
Okay.
But consider it new money. But just to get there, we entertain a lot of just new things. I mean, we're talking about rideshare increases, food delivery increases. I mean, just a number of things. And at least the way the House went about it is that we kind of took all of those revenue items and polled our members. And then based on that poll, where you could see the support differentiate, those are the items that were more on the table for the House members, because that's where we got enough support in order to, at least when it came to voting for it, we could pass it. We knew in the House that we could pass a bill.
And so did the sources that the House supported get in the final version, or did the Senate?
Well, there was still a
Comments.
negotiation, but we knew what we could support. And our polling took into consideration what the Senate put on the table as well, because the Senate did actually pass a bill at the end of May. The House did not.
Okay, so
We
you
wanted to take a little bit more of a longer walk to get there, but the Senate kind of passed the bill and threw it to us.
You already knew what they were
We kind of
proposing.
knew where they were, but so we took that into consideration. So it didn't include everything the Senate wanted, and again, number of the House items, we knew where our members would stand on those revenue sources.
One thing I read about that's in the bill is not it's a study that Metro is required to do to extend the electric line down to Kankakee, I believe. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about, I mean, even though it's just being studied, how that could benefit the district.
Ultimately, for me, extending the Metro line, you could say maybe it's about people who want to work downtown, but I can only imagine. I mean, if it takes us 45 minutes to drive now, so you extend a Metro line down there, you're really talking hour plus, hour and a half to take a ride, because it's going to stop. Unless their study suggests that maybe it should be some kind of rapid service or express service. Maybe that's the right word for it. But we'll wait to see what that study says. But I would imagine, particularly on the weekends, you might, if you're in Kankakee, might want to take a long ride down and go to Chicago for the day or something like that. I think their study will probably show that probably will be more popular on the weekends versus during the week. Because somebody who works in Kankakee, who lives in Kankakee and is working downtown, it's probably easier for them to drive than to take rail. Maybe cheaper, of course, but probably easier for them to simply drive, based on scheduling. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all based on scheduling. Now, in my opinion, the idea of extending down to Kankakee, is a positive thing in the sense that when we build the airport out there, we're going to need some kind of transit, particularly rail transit, that's extending out toward in that direction, toward that,
in that area,
for folks that work, and because it will be a cargo airport, so we're talking really about jobs and opportunities, and the fact if we're talking about that, the reverse commute, if I can call it that, those folks that say live on the south side of Chicago, south suburbs, would want to go down there, and they could take a metro train down there to work every day.
We're going to come back to the airport in a few minutes, but one last transit question is, what is the prognosis now that you've got this funding bill? Is this a commitment to continuing this level of funding and this kind of evolution, as you mentioned? Do you think it's going to have staying power, basically?
Well, I think we chose revenue sources ultimately that will remain in place. Nothing was temporary. Because if we put temporary sources out there, then we may have to come back sooner rather than later and make those adjustments. Again, when we talk about sales tax, and everything is still kind of tenuous, if you will, meaning that if you say it's sales tax revenue, that's based on spending habits of people. So if for some reason we have another downturn and people spend less, then that still becomes less revenue. But that's the source, or one of the sources anyway. So our thought is that where we are right now should sustain us well into the future. Like with any piece of legislation, as it's examined over time, you might want to come and make tweaks to it or slight changes to it, but nothing like a major overhaul should happen with regard to transit into the future from a revenue side. Now, how we see the agencies play out, particularly their governance, that's something that we're really paying real attention to, because the NETA board, so one of the criticisms that we have of the RTA board is that they were there and they didn't really do their job. They didn't really encourage efficiencies in government. They didn't encourage the coordination was necessary. It was like, and I think RTA was formed many, many years ago simply as a patronage spot for Republicans, and so they had jobs, but they just had a job. They didn't really do much of what we think they were supposed to do. So the idea with the new NETA board is that we're going to put people in place, encourage the leaders who have the appointments to appoint people who are really going to do a deep dive, pay attention, and if necessary, propose tough changes within the agencies, because they are supposed to be the oversight board of all the agencies. So the agencies are going to have to play nice in the sandbox as well. But our objective with that new governing board was that they would actually govern, and that they would bring the folks to the table and really have real conversation. And because I sit on what is called public safety appropriations, every year what was the RTA board, which will now be the NETA board, will still need to come in front of my committee. And even though it's an appropriations committee, it's not like we're giving them money, but at least it's a platform where we can hear, ask questions, and get feedback on how they're operating, what they're doing. Are they having any challenges with any of the other transit boards or agencies? And so we still have an opportunity to kind of pay attention to what they're doing and if necessary, do a deep dive.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to shift gears here a little bit. Another bill that got some attention had to do with immigration enforcement. Big news in our area through the fall was Operation Midway Blitz, which brought immigration customs enforcement agents and Customs and Border Patrol agents mainly to Chicago. So the south suburbs didn't see as much effect from those activities, but we could. And that anywhere there are immigrants living and working is susceptible to that kind of enforcement activity. And they've said as much that potentially in the spring there will be a renewed enforcement. So this bill attempts to push back a little bit at some of the tactics that the federal agents were using. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the specifics of the bill and especially touching on enforcing the state law now, because that's a difficult issue when you're talking with federal agencies versus state versus county versus local. And if a state or if federal agents are doing things that appear to violate people's rights, who has the ability to intercede? You know, so. But first, tell us about the bill and what it'll do.
Well, I think the effort in the bill was just to acknowledge that the way that the federal government was approaching this immigration idea was just, in most opinions, and I'll say in my opinion, was just not right. I get the idea of wanting to go after, I guess, criminals, if I can say it that way. I said, but then what have the FBI, the CIA, and all the other alphabet agencies been doing over the last however long? I mean, they're charged with addressing crime as well. It didn't have to be Border Patrol trying to do it that way. And those agencies, the other ones I mentioned, they have tools, resources to go after criminals as well. So it's almost, why did it have to land with Border Patrol? But nevertheless, if that's the way the president wanted to go about doing it, fine. So our objective was just to, again, uphold people's rights, basic human rights that everybody has. And there's no reason why, just because of what they're attempting to do, they should be stomping on basic human rights. You know, that's what the Constitution is for. It offers us basic, inalienable rights. And there's no reason why the federal government should just ball that up, throw it out the window, and just go about it the way they want to. Again, they have tools and resources that if they really wanted to investigate who people were and go after the supposed bad criminals that they talked about, there are ways in which they could have been doing that. I again, before we started our interview, I mentioned how I challenged some of that with some of my Republican colleagues. And one of my Republican colleagues in a floor speech talked about that. And I was like, well, what are these other folks doing? Why did we need to go about it that way versus that? And as always, they never have a real answer for me because they don't expect anybody to challenge what they're saying. And I'm just curious more than anything. So I go, ask them the questions, and the response was, well, don't you want our residents to be safe? I said, of course I do. But we had all these other folks who were tasked with doing this. So does that mean we need to get rid of them because they're not doing their jobs? You know, what is it really all about? So I think the effort legislatively was just as a state, and we've done this in other spaces when we've seen attacks on different things by the federal government, to stand up and say, we're not going to allow, we want to protect ourselves. And if passing state legislation is the way that we protect ourselves, then that's what the effort is. I mean, clearly it's a Democratic effort, because when you look at the vote totals, you see all green on the Democratic side, and you see all red on the Republican side. But you know, sometimes I just wonder, what if your loved one was treated that way? Wouldn't you be upset? You know, if by chance of them being in the wrong place, or quote unquote wrong place at the wrong time, they got caught up by Border Patrol, and because Border Patrol acts the way it does, they got shipped to a country that they have no idea where they are. You know, you'd be upset. Well, I think you'd be upset anyway. But, you know, the question is, would you show that anger? And so why should they be able to treat people inhumanely and indecently, if you will? There's no reason for it. So I think all of our legislative efforts, and again, we've seen it in some other spaces, but particularly in this space, and I think the governor just signed that bill, if I'm not mistaken, was about just protecting basic human rights of individuals. You know, truly, if the federal government felt that it needed to change those laws, if I'm not mistaken, they got the majorities in both the House and the Senate, then introduce a bill, have the debate, and if you can pass it, then pass it. This way of governing by executive order and just doing whatever they want to do, what do you call it? I'll ask for permission later, or forgiveness later, whatever the phrase is. That's just not the way you operate. You shouldn't operate like that. And if we tried to do things like that here in the state of Illinois, my Republican colleagues would go crazy. They would go absolutely crazy. The governor is this, the governor is that. Well, if that's how you felt about if the governor did that, how come you don't feel the same way because the president is doing it? And those bills are just about trying to protect basic human rights, you know, give people at least due process of law, if I can say it that way. Where does due process why does it not fit into anything that they're doing? You know, if they feel as strongly about someone, then okay, you arrest them and you put them through the due process aspect of it. You know, I mean, the commercials that I see, it makes me cringe a little bit. You know, just the way that the federal government is acting.
Yeah.
You know, and we wouldn't stand for it if there was a Democratic president. So why are we standing for it if there was there is a Republican president?
And as you alluded to, and maybe for anyone who hasn't been reading carefully this fall, multiple media outlets in the Chicago market have documented a lot of abuses of due process,
Right.
people being tackled on the street, hauled into detention centers, citizens even, and then they're later released, but they weren't treated with the process that is standard, right? So,
Right.
so
I mean, even absent of Border Patrol doing it, if local police department just rounded people up, they didn't give them access to an attorney, their phone call, whatever those things are. If local law enforcement did that, we would stand for it.
Right.
So it doesn't really make a difference to me that it's the federal agency doing it. It's still about people's basic human rights.
Exactly. And that was one of the things the bill establishes is the right of Illinois residents to sue the federal government if they believe that their rights were violated. And I thought, well, don't they already have that right to sue if they feel their rights were violated? How does the state law, will that give them any difference in their standing in the courts, do you think?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if it'll give them any more standing, but I think our effort is to, at least from a state statute perspective, create and show that there is a process by which someone can go down that path if they choose to do so. I mean, unfortunately, we're talking about people who are probably low and moderate income folks who probably don't have the resources to hire attorneys. So it becomes a challenge for them just to be able to do it anyway. But nevertheless, I think the state wanted to put things on the books to say that if that happens to you, this is your recourse from a state perspective.
So yeah, so it establishes and reinforces, I guess, their rights to do that. Another related topic by approach is the vaccine bill that was passed, which was parallel in a way in that the federal government is changing its approach to vaccines and its approach to how to determine what is appropriate health care and what health care the government supports. And our Secretary of Health is a vaccine skeptic who is eroding vaccine availability and promotion. The state is pushing back against that approach too with its own, I guess, policies regarding vaccination. And I wonder if you could talk about that may be a kind of a similar situation, but in a different realm of how the...
Well, I think, again, what we're finding is that the state is just simply standing up policies that allow for Illinois residents. This is what can happen. This is what you can do. I mentioned earlier that if the federal government thought that this was the way to go, they could actually pass legislation and enforce it that way. This is just arbitrary actions being made by that secretary who is, it seems like he is the anti of everything that he's saying. You know, eating roadkill. Walking around the airport barefoot. I mean, everything he's talking about that, you know, we should be doing or what have you, seems like he's the opposite of that in some ways. So I think what the state's approach really is simply to say that absent of the federal government, that's the, you know, how the federal government is the supreme law of the land, so to speak, when they pass a bill, and then it's pushed down to the state. So if the federal governments are not going to pass bills, then we're going to pass them and set the parameters and the stage for what we think should happen. So we've seen that vaccines are viable here in Illinois. So I think our effort is to say that as a state, we're going to support the science, the research that surrounds vaccines, and continue to encourage families to move in that way. Now, of course, families have a choice whether they can, you know, want to provide or give vaccinations to their children or not. That's still a choice, and we're not taking away the choice. We're just saying that what the science shows and what we support is that the use of vaccines is still worthwhile and still viable for our young kids coming up through school, if you will, when you talk about childhood vaccinations. And then even as adults, there are some things that are out there that science has shown are helpful to adults. And I point to, I think, shingles. There's a shingles vaccine out there, and I don't know the data that suggests that whether, I guess I don't know the data that speaks to whether or not fewer seniors or older people are, living or dying as a result of shingles versus whether or not they got the vaccine. But nevertheless, the science shows that using that vaccine can be helpful to individuals that take it, just like any other vaccines. We still get flu shots. I got a flu shot. I didn't get flu this season. That could be because I'm a kind of a phobe in that way. So, when it turns 40, I'm putting on a hat and a scarf anyway, or at least trying to stay warm and protected from the elements. But vaccines have been so helpful and useful to people over the years. So whether or not if the federal government feels that way, then they should pass laws. Have the debate on their House and Senate floors about whether that's good, take a vote, fine. And if that passes, then of course states may have to comply in that way. But absent of that, states are going to stand up what they think is the right thing to do, and that's what Illinois is doing.
Okay, great, thank you. I wanted to circle back to the airport now, if we could. I know you've been very active for a long time in advocating for the development of the South Suburban Airport, and there has been progress in the last year or so with the state being, you passed a bill to require the state to issue an RFQ, I think it was.
AQ, whichever letter you want to choose there.
But you were trying to attract aviation-related businesses to see if there was interest in private enterprise helping to develop and use that facility that's been on the drawing boards for
40,
generations.
50 years, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we wanted to check in because I know there's been progress. It's maybe not been as fast as you wanted, but where are we at now with the process of getting those companies on board?
Well, so let me start by saying, for me, the development of an airport is about growth of communities, opportunities of jobs, whether it's the permanent jobs in terms of the operations of the facility. There are a lot of construction jobs that are tied to this that will come about as a result. Opportunities for young people to learn logistics. I mean, we've got Governor State University out there. I mean, there are any number of silos that support why we would want to build such a project, a facility, if you will. The governor's own study shows that logistics growth in this region is viable. He thinks I don't know that, but it does. And I think it's important to understand, and this is where, if the governor ever saw this, he and I, he probably wouldn't be real happy with me right now. But I have always asked the question, tell me that it's not viable. Show me that it's not, and then that's something I can walk away. And for years, I have been asking that question of him, and he hasn't shown me that. It's our understanding that he does have the results of a study that speak to logistics, not specifically the airport, but logistics. Logistics growth in this region has been exponential, and we see it all the time. There are 21 Amazon fulfillment centers from the Indiana border swinging all the way around to Bolingbrook, I believe it is. Is that not logistics? And why would Amazon not want to fly a plane closer to where the majority of their facilities are versus sending it to Rockford and then having to put it on a truck and bring it down here? I mean, and I'm not an educator in that way, but there are just some things that are just obvious about the development and the growth of an airport, which is why we introduced legislation, because the governor said nobody wants to use it. Nobody's out there, who wants to use it? So the objective of the bill, and I really have to credit Rick Bryant from Representative Robin Kelly's office, who's been around this longer than I have, if you will, with help draft the legislation, would say, okay, Governor, let's put this out here and let's see who's interested in it. Bill was passed. I think he had to sign it, if you will. He signed it, and lo and behold, there's a whole list of folks who would have an interest in possibly building an airport. So now IDOT is tasked with soliciting those requests reviewing those requests and narrowing it down to, I think, like the top 3, if you will, based on whatever those factors are, and then let's start moving forward down the road with it. I mean, the governor has maintained Chicago doesn't want it. I'm a South Suburban legislator. Not that I don't care about Chicago, but again, the results of the study show that Midway and O'Hare would not be harmed by this airport, which is solely focused on cargo, not passengers, cargo. You know, and if the governor really, again, show me, you know, governor, sit me down and show me the results of the study that you commissioned, because I brought this conversation to him I think it was right before COVID, and said, here's what we're proposing. And he said, well, I want to study it first. So I think IDOT did a study. And his staff, and I'm going to say it to your viewers, his staff lied to me and said, we're ready to show you. We want to show you the study. We're excited to show you the results. And that was 3 years ago. And nobody from his staff, and I think the same person who told me that is still on his staff, has yet to just bring me in, myself, maybe Representative DeLuca, Representative Myers-Martin, or any of the South Suburban legislators, sit us down and say, this is what we learned. So how do we move forward with this? I don't know if this is because it wasn't his idea necessarily, unlike the Quantum Park, which I guess is his idea, and it's moving like gangbusters. So how does he get to decide all the growth and development in the state of Illinois versus what we may have an interest in? And again, I simply ask, if you think it's not viable, show me that it's not viable. And it can't be because Chicago doesn't want it. You know, Chicago does any number of things to support its residents in the city. And ironically enough, a project like this would support the city of Chicago because it would create job opportunities for anybody in Chicago, particularly those on the south side who'd be willing to take the ride out. No different than folks out here in the south suburbs. We take those rides out to Oak Brook, western suburbs, because that's where the jobs are. Why wouldn't folks want to take a ride out here if that's where the job is and where they can find an opportunity to sustain themselves and their families? So we think that, and IDOT has pushed off, I guess, revealing, if you will, the results of the collaboration of organizations that want to build the airport. At this point, I don't know what the delay is. Let's get it out there. To me, the delay suggests that, again, it's interest. There's viability in it. There's interest in it. And this would show that the governor was wrong about something. And he hates to be wrong.
Do you know about how many companies responded?
It was not specifically, but it's my understanding that initially from the RFA, QI, whatever it was, initially about 12.
Oh, okay.
And I think what IDOT then suggested to the 12 is that, so you all can do different things. Maybe consider forming some partnerships amongst all of you. So bringing someone that understands the development, the construction, the finance, if you will, and start to build some partnerships. And if not mistaken, out of that, there are 3 groups that are now groups.
They did actually form.
Form some partnerships, and there's 3 groups, and those are the 3 groups that they are ultimately looking at. I mean, at some point, IDOT has got to do something, because again, as a legislator, I'm tasked with supporting everything the governor wants to do. But one of the things that I've asked him to do, why can't I get the same reciprocity as a legislator?
Was there a deadline built into that bill that required IDOT to respond at a certain time or anything? I can't remember.
The initial deadline was, I believe, summer of this year. I believe that was the initial deadline. And so IDOT has pushed it out. And at that point, okay, you want to push it out, fine. But you still need to keep working toward doing that. You still need to keep working toward doing that. And I've had my conversations with one of the airlines. I think it was United. I think I had a conversation with them about it, and they were, that's going to take away from what we do. I was like, well, first of all, it's a cargo airport, not a passenger. And they said, well, we fly cargo in the belly of our planes. I was like, not at this level. We're talking about entire planes being full of cargo. Your planes are passengers, and then if you have space for cargo, you put it in there. But it's not; these aren't cargo airlines that you're flying, unless you're going to start moving out of the passenger space. And I don't think you will. But I think what makes the airlines upset is that current investments that they've made, that have been made at O'Hare and Midway, are funded by the airlines. There's no government money doing
Oh,
that.
yeah.
They fund it. And so now we've got a project out here where there might be some government dollars in, particularly with the land. The state owns the land.
Yeah.
But the developers are tasked with finding the resources and putting the resources together. I recently watched a video that my district director showed me about this cargo airport in China, I believe it is. Fascinating. Absolute fascinating how it's just moving millions of pounds of packages just all over the world. And the idea that we can build an airport with a long enough runway so that a plane can take off from there and fly 22 hours to the other side of the world, if you will. What's wrong? Nobody's ever told me that that's a bad thing. You know, I get the competition aspect of it, but it doesn't make any sense when as a government, we talk about growth, we talk about development, we talk about jobs. This project is all of that. And why it's not getting the traction it should from this administration, I have no idea. No idea. And again, I've asked, explain it to me. Sit me down and explain it to me. And for whatever reason, they will not sit me down and explain it to me.
Well, it sounds like something we'll have to check in with you again. I'm sure you'll be watching it carefully. So,
Well,
yeah.
this next upcoming session, to me, is the perfect opportunity to start early in session and start raising those
Raising it
issues
up.
and asking those questions.
Okay.
You know, maybe I should consider changing some of my committee assignments around so I can be on the transportation committee
Yeah.
and use that committee as a way to advocate for. IDOT comes before my appropriations committee, but maybe a substantive committee.
Yeah.
You know, and have them to come and testify at a hearing and explain to me what's going on.
And you'd be in the room.
What's going on?
Yeah.
And my guess is that in other spaces, the governor has no problem talking to legislators.
Yeah.
He brings them in, he sits them down. This is what we're going to do. This is what's going to happen. Why does he have a problem with bringing me in and sitting me down and explaining things to me?
Okay, well, good luck getting in the door there.
I'll keep trying. I will keep trying.
I had one last issue I wanted to bring up real quick. I know it's another one that's that you're deeply involved in, and that's education funding. I had a colleague, Marilyn Thomas, covers several school boards in our area, and we've done a number of stories on a program that was, I think, popular with boards and with taxpayers, which was the property tax relief grants.
Correct.
Property tax paying is still an issue here, and so any little thing that could help was welcome. But she said that program is either ended or has faded. And I don't know if you know the status of it or whether it might return or whether you'll be pushing for that. I thought you could tell us the status.
So in the allocation of K through 12 funding every year, since 2017, there's been a $50 million allocation that would go to this relief grant, which was basically a grant to school districts, and is calculated by the State Board of Education, and it would basically restrict them from levying that much when they put out their levies to the taxpayers. It would restrict them from doing so. So that's been in place, and it was funded every year until this past year. Now, again, I chair the K through 12 Appropriations Committee. I think this was an ask of the governor not to fund it, but he wanted to study it. But once again, as chair of the committee, I wasn't invited to any conversations or any meeting to say we're not going to do that this year, and here's why we're not going to do it. Now, if they want to study it, which I can appreciate, they want to study to make sure that the objective of it, that it's meeting its objective. So I know that the bill restricted, the original bill restricted districts from levying whatever they got in terms of the property tax grant. So it's not like they're getting the grant money and then still levying to get additional revenue. It restricted that.
Yeah,
But in this broader conversation about property tax relief, okay, fine. You want to make sure that the districts that get it, are they offering any relief? I guess I'll say it that way to their residents. But again, in order to do that, they stopped it. In most cases, we continue it while we're studying it. But in this case, we stopped it. And again, I was not invited to any conversation by the governor or his administration to say we're not going to fund the property tax relief grant. When my committee offered its version of the K through 12 budget to the speaker, it included the property tax relief grant.
Oh, okay.
So when the speaker, the Senate president, and the governor and their teams, if I can say it that way, get together, that's where the negotiation began. And I think the governor's push against the relief grant and the others, while it was a negotiation, that came out of the negotiation that we would not fund the tax relief grant for school districts. And I know most of the districts, again, I don't know if it's just pointed at out here, because most of the districts out here got the relief grant. I think out of the 10 or so districts, I think 8 of them are South suburban districts. I think Summit was one of them, which is a little to the west, but they were out here. So once again, the governor, again, and I'm saying it this way, and again, if he watches this, if he wants to talk to me, he knows my number, is saying that we're not going to fund a relief grant that's been helpful to districts out here in the Southland. You know, it seems like a lot of his efforts against stuff is pointed at the Southland. Again, why? I don't know why. You know, I have absolutely no why.
We'll have to ask him.
That is the case. And if you get a chance, I would really like to know what his answer is, because clearly he doesn't want to have that conversation with me.
Well, we'll have to ask the governor then, I guess. Is it something that you think you might try to put forward again the next
absolutely.
year? Okay.
Absolutely. So one of the unique pieces of the education funding bill that we passed in 2017 is we created this entity called the Professional Review Panel. The PRP, as we call it, it's tasked with maintaining the fidelity of the funding formula. And so if there is a interest in a change, in most cases, we ask that member to put together a resolution and directing the PRP to study this. Now, that didn't happen in this case. It was, they looked at it from a monetary decision and said, we're not going to fund that. So now they're studying it, but the PRP could have studied that. You know, we have a number of stakeholders around the table that include advocates, tax policy advocates, educators, administrators. It's the gamut of people in the education space, including the State Board of Education. So the PRP could have studied it if they really wanted to know its effectiveness, but instead of just giving PRP the opportunity, they made a decision simply not to fund it, but supposedly there is a study underway to take a look at it. And again, let's hope, and because the idea of studying it is more of a public thing, if you will, unlike with the airport, this is what the governor wanted to do. And so those results are kept only to him and IDOT, I guess. This is a more public conversation. So whatever the results of the study are, a lot of people are going to be asking, okay, what does it say? What does it show? Should we put the 50 million back in? And again, even if it was about removing the 50 million, again, a conversation would have been is that if you really don't want to fund that, leave the 50 million in and push it into the tier funding for the district so it still goes out to school districts. Hey, that's what I would have proposed, but nobody proposed that.
They could use that money.
School districts could still use the resources to do so, but when I'm not invited into the conversation appropriately, I can offer my opinion as chair of the committee and send it up through the ranks, if you will, to the speaker's office, and then they become part. They're intimately involved in negotiation as one leg of the three-leg stool, if you will. But I wasn't there, so I would have said, fine, if you don't want to fund it, then put that money into the formula. And that's been a challenge, asking the governor to put more money into the formula. Not only more money into the formula overall, but make it what we call there's a term where no matter what we call an above the line expenditure. So when you look at the broader budget, there are what we call above the line expenditures, which are things like pension payments, Medicaid payments. Those are payments we're going to make no matter what, based on whatever the allocation is necessary. Then everything else is discretionary or below the line expenditure. We can make decisions about where we spend and what we spend, and that could fluctuate from year to year. I've suggested that K through 12 spending should be an above the line expenditure. You know, let's set an amount, make it an above the line expenditure, and then we can always evaluate whether or not that should increase, because there's no reason why it shouldn't increase for schools. But the governor has not wanted to make it an above the line expenditure. He's comfortable right at the 300 million, excuse me. And we appreciate that, don't get me wrong. We appreciate the new allocation of new money every year. We do, but we know that we're still behind in terms of school funding. And when are we ever going to get to the point where we decide we need to start getting to that 90% of adequacy that all school districts should be at? Our path forward has been working. We have no school districts less than 60%, and most are, just about most are at 70% or above. So it's been working, but those districts that are still, you know, in the 70s, ultimately we want to
Still
get them
need
to 90%. And just for clarity, we say 90% because we get about 10% of dollars from the federal government. So
Okay.
from terms of the state and local allocations, our goal is 90% of
90%.
adequacy,
Okay.
and the rest will be filled in by the federal government, presumably. So.
All right. Well, thank you for an update on that. And I think we probably used up all our time that we can afford. I know you have other things to get to, so I want to
I
thank you
appreciate
again for coming and talking to us and helping us understand some of these important issues that the state government has been
Pleasure
involved in.
of mine, and thank you.